Hi there. Thanks for clicking on this video. If you're a CEO that is trying to raise money and is struggling, maybe you're also trying to get the attention of strategic acquirers and can't quite do it, or even get commercial traction, this series is for you. My name is Omar Khatib. I'm the CEO of MarketCraft, a market engineering agency that works with early stage companies to essentially get traction when it comes to raising capital and also drive clinical adoption. I'm also the host of the #1 podcast in Medtech, where we interview investors, strategics, and also founders. So we bring all those lessons here for you to learn. So let's get into our first video. So you've built something that's clinically better, more precise, more effective, but you're still struggling to get traction. And it's mainly because great technology doesn't struggle when the technology is wrong. That's often not the case. It's sometimes struggled because of what the company assumed would happen when the technology was ready. So let's get into what that specifically means. So let me ask you a question. When does commercialization actually happen? And this doesn't matter whether you're pre-FDA, post-FDA, or anything else. A lot of founders and Medtech CEOs give one of three answers, usually after the FDA, after hiring sales, or at commercial launch. And these answers make perfect sense. But they're also the reason why so many different companies struggle, whether we see them on our podcast or they come to MarketCraft. It's because by the time you think about commercialization, the market has already made up its mind. MedTech companies are incredibly disciplined about reducing risk. FDA clearance reduces regulatory risk, clinical studies reduce your scientific risk, patents on your IP risk, right? You spend years and millions of dollars reducing each one of these risks, and you should, but notice the thing that is common among these three different items. They all reduce the risk of building the technology. They don't reduce the risk of whether the market will adopt it. Now let's add one more row. Market risk is unaddressed. There's no clear owner, no roadmap, no milestones. And investors see this, and often they hesitate. Even after they say that they love your technology and product, they're not only asking, does this work? They're asking, will the market actually move on this? A company can prove the technology and still leave the investment thesis unproven, because whether you're talking to a venture capitalist or a strategic acquirer who might invest, right, you're trying to sell a financial vehicle. So you publish the data, you secure FDA clearance, you raise millions of dollars, maybe you hire some salespeople to execute go-to-market, and then the market still barely moves. Why? This is the moment that breaks a lot of medtech CEOs and founders. They did everything they were told to do, and yet the product didn't get adopted. The market didn't move. That is not necessarily a technology failure. It's a market failure. Now, these are two timelines that are running from the day the company begins. The first is a product development one, idea, build, clearance, etc. The second is market belief, investor confidence, KOL advocacy, physician awareness, all these things. Almost nobody tracks that timeline with the same level of discipline that they do on the product side. But belief does not suddenly appear after you launch. It has to be building, or it's failing to build, the entire time. Launch does not create the market's opinion of you, it reveals it. Products are engineered, markets are assumed. No founder would leave the clinical pathway, regulatory strategy, or even product design up to chance. Yet so many companies that we talk to routinely assume that awareness, credibility, advocacy, demand, all these things are just going to magically appear once the product is ready and you launch into market. And that assumption is the hidden risk, because markets do not organize themselves around your technology simply because it works or it's even better than the existing standard. Now, you've probably experienced some version of one of these three rooms. An investor loves the technology, but they don't invest. A physician says the technology is really impressive. They don't adopt. Strategic acquirer or partner say that they're interested, but they just ghost you, right? These are three rooms, three audiences, but it's the same level of science, the same problem, actually. And it's very tempting to call these things all separate problems. There's a fundraising problem, adoption problem, business development problem, but often they are the same problem, just appearing in different places. The market does not yet believe strongly enough to act or change behavior. Now, technology changes what is medically possible, but belief changes what people actually do. Your technology can be clinically valid, better, all these different things, but people, they're not going to act on it and change their behavior simply because something is true or better, right? They act when truth becomes believable enough and valuable enough to justify the action. It's not being cynical. This is actually how adoption works psychologically in markets. Now, product fit answers one question: is it the right product for the customer? But it doesn't answer the second question, which is the market ready to act, which is where we think about market product fit. A great product can enter an unready market and still produce no adoption. Not because the product failed, but because the market did not yet understand the old problem, the new solution, and why they should change and adopt. So how does the market actually become ready? It happens in a sequence. You have this clinical evidence that creates credibility, credibility that strengthens investor confidence, confidence that helps attract KOL advocacy that builds physician awareness, awareness that compounds into market trust, and trust finally becomes traction. Each step makes the next step easier. If you skip anything in the sequence, the chain starts to weaken. Belief is not a campaign that you just switch on. It's an asset you have to build from the very beginning. So this brings us to a central idea that products are engineered, but so should markets. We can call this discipline market engineering. It means deliberately shaping how the market understands the problem, values a solution, and builds confidence to change its behavior and act. Now, you've already had a very rigorous process when it comes to engineering your product. The question is, do you have anything close to that same level of rigor when it comes to engineering the market around it? So even when the product works, traction does not automatically follow. There is this gap between having a product and having a repeatable market demand. That gap is where a lot of companies burn runway, lose momentum, and begin questioning whether the technology itself has a problem, right? And most companies enter this. Many never recognize what's happening until it's too expensive to recover. And in the next episode, we're going to cover what that space is called and how you recognize it, more specifically where your company falls into it. And it's called the traction. All right, thanks for coming to the second of 4 lecture series. So today we're going to cover the traction gap. And the question is very simple. Why do great companies essentially stall between product and adoption? It's not because the science is not good or the product sucks. Sometimes that happens. But a lot of times that's not the case, especially in medtech. They stall because proving the product and building a repeatable market demand are two very separate things. The traction gap is essentially the space between those two achievements. Today has one purpose: to make this gap very visible and for you to understand where your company falls in it. So let's get right into it. All right, so sit with this for a second. Roughly 3 out of 4 venture-backed startups are going to just fail outright. And if failure means not delivering the return investors expected, the number is actually closer to 95%. These are not companies that nobody believed in. They raised money, they recruited teams, all these great things. The failure happened after they raised the capital. It did not guarantee that the market would follow just because they raised money. I think one of the most expensive and dangerous beliefs in medtech is that the best product eventually wins. Does not. We see this in so many different cases, not just in medtech, but in all kinds of business industries across the board. Initial product release doesn't mean that you validated the market. Just because you got early revenue does not mean that you have repeatability, and funding does not mean you're inevitable. Each one does feel like progress, and it should, but none of them proves that you've actually built a market. A product can launch, a customer can buy, an investor can fund you, and the company can still be nowhere close to a repeatable traction. And let's focus on that word for a second. We use the word traction far too loosely. Shipping a product is not traction, or raising capital, or one early customer. None of these things are traction. Okay, traction is actually repeatable, measurable evidence of market demand. Repeatable is an important word in this case. So one hospital buying once is an encouraging story. Multiple hospital buying for the same reason through a process that you can actually repeat, that's traction. Traction is not activity. It's evidence that the market is beginning to behave predictably. And this dictates whether you're going to raise more money, a strategic acquirer is going to potentially invest, maybe acquire you, and clinicians will adopt you. The good news is that this is not a mysterious gap. It actually has been mapped. Bruce Cleveland, who's a venture capitalist, early product engineer at Apple and Oracle, then went on to be a VC, made some really great investment. They spent a lot of money to figure this out. We're actually a certified agency that have taken that framework and adapted it to MedTech. Okay. And specifically that you can move from idea to product, product to traction, eventually traction to scale. But the space between, as you can see here, is an actual gap where traction is lacking. And there are different inflection points where we have to figure out how do we manufacture and engineer the market to gain more traction so that we raise money at certain inflection points. The big mistake is treating all these different things as one event called the product launch. The product launch is not the finish line. It's the beginning of where the work required to prove that demand can actually repeat. And you have to start thinking about this even earlier, even when you're pre-FDA. Now, here's the pattern I've seen Medtech over and over again. Strong clinical validation, FDA clearance, a capable team, and yet still no meaningful commercial movement or early clinical adoption. Usually the missing pieces are not technical. It's that there's an unclear category, the positioning is weak, and the market does not know where this product fits. And the company literally has no repeatable adoption pattern or model. We see this not only with pre-FDA, pre-commercial companies, we see this with companies who are commercial and generating some revenue. It's not necessarily, again, a product failure, it's a market failure. The traction gap is not a waiting room, it's a clock. Every quarter you remain stuck, runway gets shorter, competitors gain around, the market forms opinions without you, and it becomes harder to raise money. And when you do raise money, that's when potentially a down round can happen where you raise at a lower valuation than your previous round. Waiting does not preserve your position, it actually weakens it in the market. Every quarter without deliberate market progress is a quarter that you're not going to get back. You can lose money and you can always make money back. You're not going to get time back. Now, belief creates the initial momentum. Investors can get interested. It'll attract early clinical adopters and KOLs, maybe early adoption. But belief alone will not carry you across that gap. At some point, interest has to become evidence. Advocacy has to become adoption. And those early wins have to get to a point where they're repeatable. That requires engineering. You have to know and understand the milestones that you're at, what must be true next, and what system you're going to move to get you there. Belief opens the door. Engineering actually creates a path through it. So the traction gap gives you a map. It shows you where your company is at and where it's going to stall and which milestones matter. But a map does not move you. Market engineering is the vehicle. It's the discipline that turns market understanding into deliberate motion with clear positioning, strong advocacy, a category, repeatable proof, and a go-to-market system built around how adoption actually happens. Knowing where you are is actually very useful, but building what moves you forward is what changes the outcome. Now, most founders can actually point where they are on this map, whether the product is built, FDA clear, early customers, all these things. But here's the question I want to ask you. What is deliberately moving you from where you are to where you need to be? What system is building the category understanding? What is creating physician belief? What's creating those early wins into a repeatable system of adoption? If the answer is mostly relationships, momentum, and hope, and you know the road, well, you still do not have a vehicle yet. And that's the problem we're going to solve in our next video. So where does this leave us? Building the vehicle is only half the problem. Once it's built, the market still has to adopt it. And markets don't adopt new things the way you'd hope. That's the exact problem we pick up on our next lecture, which is crossing the chasm where market engineering meets the technology adoption curve. So we'll see you in the next episode. So welcome back to video 3 of 4 in our series. So last time we talked about the traction gap. Today we're going to answer a different question. Why do companies create excitement but never create adoption? Because getting noticed and then getting adopted, again, two very different and completely different problems. And if you don't understand the difference, you're going to mistake attention for progress. And that's where a lot of companies get stuck. So Jeff Moore essentially identified something every medtech founder eventually experiences. Your first customers are not like everyone who comes after them. Early adopters essentially buy the possibility. They like trying new things. They tolerate uncertainty. They're going to work with your product team, give you feedback. The mainstream does not. They want proof. They want references. They want all these things. They want to know someone like them has already succeeded using your technology. The mistake isn't believing that the market wants your product. The mistake is assuming that everyone buys for the same reason. Now, every breakthrough follows this pattern of the hype cycle. This is the Gartner hype cycle. Something new gets attention. Headlines, conferences, etc. Everyone starts talking. It feels like momentum, but then attention isn't the same as adoption. Eventually, reality catches up, expectations fall, but companies that build trust survive. The spike is definitely exciting. It's important. The plateau is actually what matters, though. This chart should make you pause for a second. You can think of this as the evolution of market or the development of a category. Early on, companies flood into a new market, a new category. Everyone believes they'll be the winner. Then something happens. A lot of them disappear, not because the opportunity disappeared, but because the market became more selective. As the market matures, attention becomes trust. Think about when I say electric car, we all thought of Tesla. They weren't the first, they're not the only, but they own that category. Now, if we combine all these charts together, they line up both qualitatively and quantitatively, right? 3 different frameworks, 3 different researchers, but it comes to the same conclusion, which is the crowd always shows up first, but most of it disappears, and only a handful of them make it to the mainstream, right? You got to think about how you leverage this to your advantage, and more importantly, how this fits based on the traction gap that we just talked about. If you remember one thing from today's lecture, remember this is that attention is not adoption, hype is not trust, and just because people are talking, that doesn't mean that they're changing their behavior. And behavior is what creates companies, and this takes time and patience and consistency. Now, a lot of companies think that visibility end up winning. It's not. It's signal. Signal wins. Signal is connected. It compounds. It's when one respected physician influences another. A KOL creates credibility. A publication reinforces another. This is how markets actually move. Yeah, noise creates impressions, but signal creates conviction. And we want to think about how do we create that in a repeatable manner. And so this is where market engineering really changes the game. We're not trying to make more people notice you. We're trying to make the right people believe in you, whether it's investors, strategic acquirers, or early clinical adopters. And that's a completely different objective. Attention can be bought. Belief has to be engineered. And that's what category design, narrative, and the go-to-market motion are designed to essentially accomplish. Now, founders and Medtech CEOs always ask me, well, what's the one thing we should do? And the unfortunate answer, there isn't one. Market engineering is a system. Category design essentially defines the problem. The narrative explains why it matters. And then your go-to-market process delivers it consistently. If you miss one, the entire system weakens and it doesn't work. Great markets aren't built through isolated tactics. They're built through alignment. Now, this surprises people. Notice what's missing here. It's no paid advertising, no demand gen, no lead campaigns. Why? Because demand only amplifies what already exists. So if there's an unclear category, advertising simply spreads more confusion faster. Build the belief first, and then you can use paid ads to amplify it. And I see this over and over again. FDA happens, everyone celebrates, and then someone asks, so what's our go-to-market strategy? That's backwards, right? By then, the market has already been forming opinion for years. You can't build a category position or leadership in the same quarter that you're trying to hit revenue. It just doesn't work. The thing to know is that your go-to-market strategy didn't necessarily fail. It just showed up too late. CB Insights actually shows that 35% of all startups actually fail not because of a bad product, it's because they had no market need. As you can see here, the number one reason is they run out of capital. That's a lagging indicator. The number one reason, no market read. And I think there's something deeper happening here. Most founders, what they hear is, well, nobody wanted the product. What if that's not the real problem? What if the real problem is that people never really understood it? What if the market had never had a framework to value those products? That's a very different diagnosis of what we're looking at. And so most companies don't have a demand problem. What they have is a definition. Now, I want you to look at these two columns. Don't think about your competitors. Think about your company. Which side describes you? Okay. Press releases, conference buzz, all these things. These things feel productive, but they don't necessarily build belief. Now, look at the other side. Category, proof, advocates, references. That's a signal. That's the kind of thing that's going to survive. Now, everything we've covered today leads to one conclusion. Attention isn't enough. Signal isn't enough. Even trust isn't enough. That's why the first inflection point we talk about is category, the minimum viable category in category design. It gives the market a way to organize around your innovation because markets don't organize around the best technology, as we've mentioned before. They organize around the company that defines what the technology means. And that's where we're going to go in our next video. All right, thank you for making it to this final video and taking a few minutes to watch these things. I hope it's been informative. So I want to show you this last idea. If it changes the way you think about your go-to-market, commercialization, raising money, I think it's worth us spending 15 minutes of time to meet. You know, you'll get a meeting link through a message, or you can actually go to MarketCraft.ai. So here it is. Most companies, they think category design is marketing. It isn't. Okay. It's the first commercial decision your company makes. If you get it right, everything gets a lot easier afterwards. Not only when it comes to commercialization, but also raising capital and getting in front of strategic acquirers. Now you get it wrong, then you're going to spend years trying to figure out what happened and fix a problem that was created essentially before you even launched them. Okay, so now let's get into it. So every founder believes that their product is their competitive advantage. And it is just not the way most people think about it, unfortunately. A great product earns you the opportunity to compete. It's actually just table stakes, to be honest, if you think about it, especially in medtech. It doesn't determine who wins. Markets don't organize around the best technology. They organize around the company that defines what that technology means. So the product essentially gets you invited to the table and gets you a seat, but the category essentially determines who's going to lead that conversation. And here's what almost every startup roadmap looks like. Build, validate, launch, scale. Okay. Now look at where category, minimum viable category actually belongs. It becomes the first thing before launch, before you go to market, even before your initial product release. You have to think about those things, right? Before anyone decides what your technology means, every milestone after this inherits the definition that you created today or the confusion that you leave behind. And even if you're just doing an early clinical study with one clinician, you have to figure out what the narrative and messaging and language is, because that person's going to talk to other peers, right? Those are moments that you're going to have to capitalize on. You don't want to leave it up to chance. Now, this statistic really surprises people. 76% of category profits go to the category leader. It's not the first company, not the company with the most futures or the cheapest. It's the leader, which raises a very interesting question. If most of the economics go to the leader, why would you build your company to compete for second place? And this is where a lot of medtech companies fail, is by going into an existing category with an existing category king, right? Every startup says they're better technology, better workflow, better this. Here's the problem. Better is essentially measured against someone else's category, which means your competitor defines the rules. Different changes the rules. Better competes. When you have different, you're forcing a decision. You want somebody to make a decision, not forcing a comparison. If you force a comparison, you're probably going to lose to the category leader. Now, what most companies try and do is outcompete. Better sales, better marketing, better execution. But if you're competing inside someone else's definition, you're essentially helping them grow their category. You have to first out-define, and then you have to out-compete. So imagine two companies, same funding, same traction, similar technology. One wins on features. Eventually, competitors start to copy them. That's what's going to end up happening. The other company, though, defines the market. They shape how buyers think. They become a reference point. That's where pricing power comes from. Same starting line for these companies, but completely different finish. The difference wasn't the product in this case. It was the market that they built around it. Now, let me leave you with this one question today. If I asked everyone on your team to describe your category, would they all give me the same answer? If not, your market definitely won't. Okay, that's the work. Before another launch, before another website or anything else, I think this is the most important thing, is defining your minimum viable category, but more importantly, the market engineering that needs to go around that to put you in the best position of success to raise capital, attract early strategic interest, and get early clinical adoption. So if that's a conversation worth having, check your messages for a link to our calendar, or go to our website, MarketCraft.ai, and book some time. I'd love to talk to you, and I'm going to come to that meeting with my team with 3 ideas for you. If there's an opportunity to work together, great. If not, the ideas are always free. Thanks for watching this video series, and if you'd like, subscribe to our channel.